Ashley, this is Gwen, and I was going to ask you, I was contemplating taking the Consilience Group contract and doing it first on the agenda, but I'm not sure. I see Angela and Donna were listed as presenters, and I don't know if they're coming now or later. Do you have any idea? Or are you handling it?
It's just Dalton and I can see if Dalton can go first. Let me chat him really quick.
That's a much shorter item than the other one, and I'd love to just clear it out, and then we can have the rest of the meeting for the second item.
Okay, cool. Great.
You can sit here and listen to everything else.
Sounds good. No, thank you. Let me see what I'm sure that'll be fine. I think we're both planning on being here.
Okay.
Okay, Dalton's joining.
Okay, great.
Hey, can we promote some of the folks from the attendees list? Let's see, I'll list off some of the names. Chaz, Claire Bopp, David, Jim Hicks, Miranda Sanderson, and Sarah Phoenix. Thank you.
Great.
I can go through those names again too if you need to. Oh, and Ricky's now.
Okay. All right, and Claire, if you're ready, and we can start streaming, I'll start the meeting. Just let me know.
Yeah, we are streaming. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. Good morning. It is March 16th, 2022, and I am calling the Committee of the Whole for the Missoula City Council meeting to order for this morning. We are still having virtual meetings, and listed on the screen are different ways that you can provide public comment. You can always email us. The email address is council@ci.missoula.mt.us. You can call and leave a voicemail at 406-552-6012. And then you can always join virtually if you go to the meetings and agenda page for the City of Missoula, find this meeting and open up the agenda. There is a link to join. Okay, if you could do a roll call for attendance, Claire, I would appreciate it.
Give me a second to pull up the right screen. All right, Stacy Anderson.
Present.
Mirta Becerra.
Present.
John Contos.
Here.
Jordan Hess.
He's absent today.
Okay. Gwen Jones.
Present.
Amber Sherrill.
Present.
Sandra Vasica. Absent. Heidi West. Kristen Jordan.
Present.
Mike Nugent.
Present.
Dan Carlino.
Present.
And Jennifer Savage. Absent.
And I do see Sandra Vasika.
Present. I'm sorry, my baby was crying.
No worries. You got
And-
you counted.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Looks like we have a quorum. We have minutes from February 23rd, the water litigation final vote. We have those minutes to approve. Are there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved, and I will take public comment on items not on the agenda. If you want to give public comment, please raise your hand. I'm not seeing any raised hands, so we will go forward with our agenda items. Okay, great. So we've got two agenda items. I'm actually going to switch the order and take 3.2 Consilience Group LLC training scope of work contract. I'm going to take that first. I think it's a small, simple item. We will get that done. And then we've got the Operation Shelter update that we can spend the majority of time on. So I believe Ashley Brittany Wells is here to present on that, and also Dalton from Human Resources. Ashley?
Gwen, I don't see Dalton yet, so I'm wondering if he's having some technical difficulties. He said he was trying to connect to Zoom, but I don't see him yet, and I'm not sure. Would it be possible to wait for him?
You know
Let me
what?
send him another invitation.
Oh, I see him. There he is.
Oh,
I
great.
think he's in now, so I think we
Perfect.
can go forward with this item.
Awesome.
All right, great.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. Technology but is not always our friend.
No problem. You're here in the nick of time. We bumped you
Right?
up to present first. So if you two want to take it away, go ahead.
Thank you. So while Dalton's pulling up the presentation, I will just introduce myself. My name is Ashley Brittner Wells. I use she, her pronouns. I started work with the JEDI, the JEDI initiatives around this time last year, maybe a little later, almost a year ago, really with our National League of Cities project as the JEDI Fellow. I am now the community engagement specialist for community planning, development, and innovation, but here bringing this contract forward along with Dalton, who's been an integral piece of this initiative as well. Dalton, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. Good morning. My name is Dalton. I am an HR generalist for the city. And Ashley shared, we've been working with the JEDI cohort since the beginning. And we just had our initial meeting yesterday as a group. And I'll share that, although not the topic of this conversation, we have a group of energized employees at the city ready to do impactful work. So thank you so much.
Awesome. We can start with the second slide, Dalton, if you're able to advance. Thank you. So, you know, this work has been happening for a while, but really formalized last year within approving funding through the fiscal year 2022 budget, specifically $150,000 from ARPA funds to grow and sustain JEDI principles, really helping us redefine how government works, driving cultural transformation, and helping us design equitable services. You'll see at the bottom of each of these slides, Dalton has included a part of a related piece of our strategic plan. So here we say we share a commitment across departments to equity and social justice as an ongoing practice to measure effectiveness. Dalton, you can advance the slide, please. And so today we're here asking for funding from that $150,000 to continue our JEDI leadership training program. We received a grant through our National League of Cities involvement to do an initial foundational training for our senior leadership team, the mayor and other key leaders, including a couple members of city council, to foundational, provide a foundational training. And so this is really a continuation of that work to train city leaders and our strategic implementation work teams, including our city Jedi team that Dalton referenced at the beginning, to really receive foundational Jedi values as they relate to the City of Missoula's existing guiding principles and strategic framework, implement pre and post training assessment to establish baseline and change after training, and provide tools for applying skills to demonstrate measurable and observable individual leadership and organizational behavior change. So this is really foundational, discussing core concepts and principles, what municipal practices can be examined, et cetera. Consilience Group LLC works in a systems transformation structure, working to educate and empower employees of an organization while transforming systemic inequities. Through our work with Learn Missoula, we know not only that we need to educate and inform City of Missoula employees, but also assess what they are learning and if they are applying that knowledge. And this contract will provide information and follow-up assessments to ensure employees feel ready to use the skills that they attain. So with that, I will pass to Dalton to describe the fee and timeline for this contract.
Thanks, Ashley. All right, so as Ashley shared, we are selected to continue to use Consilience Group. For those of you council members that have already participated, that is the same facilitators. Tracy and her team will continue to do this work at a larger scale. It was a high clip impact that you saw in your presentations with Tracy. This cost of $55,000 is going to be significantly more in depth. All working in training sessions for learning and development will be conducted online. Right now, we've identified 150 City of Missoula employees to participate in training. There's really unlimited potential for future growth here. It's not limiting who can participate, it's the capacity to get everyone to participate at the right time is where we're at. And we truly believe, just as you do, that everyone serving the public, has a responsibility to advance justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in their actions. Being accountable for Jedi involves being responsible for understanding the dimensions of social equity. Working with Tracy gives us the ability to access, process the quality and outcomes. And we also understand that these intersections will influence one another. So today's ask, remember these funds have already been approved. They're going to be approving just the mayor to sign the contract to continue to do the work that we're already doing. Consilience is a woman-owned business, meaning another initiative of the city. And then it's also driving the purpose of the Jedi resolution that was passed, creating a shared responsibility within our city and within our community. Are there any questions?
Great, thank you. And I will just note that I was one of the initial city councilors who got to do the training, and I think it is really good, really valuable. And I'm glad to see that we are starting to increase the capacity now. Okay, I have some questions. Ms. Becerra?
Thank you. Yeah, Dalton, could you be more specific about where the funding for this came from?
Yeah, it's my understanding that it was the initial $150,000 that was approved from the ARPA funds.
Thank you. I don't know if this is the time, Madam Chair, but I'm happy to put the motion on the floor.
Thank you. That motion is in order. I'm going to keep going through counselors, and it can be questions or comments. Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. Dalton, I'm just curious, how did you guys identify the first 150 people to go through the program? Is it volunteer, or people, what is that, volunteered to go, mandatory voluntarily ordered to go? And how do we get in on this? Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. And Ashley and I talked about this yesterday in depth. It's really comes down to the strategic implementation work teams. There's about 80 to 90 folks that are on those teams. And then we also have 26 plus or minus on any given day, part of the JEDI cohort, the JEDI strategic implementation work team. And then we're also throwing in deputy directors, the communication, anyone working on for the city that does communication outwards, they're participating. That's where we came up with the 150.
And I think as we go forward and more people are trained, so Kristen, I know you expressed an interest and I'm sure we can get you in.
I will say, yeah, Consilience is very flexible in terms of how many folks can attend each training. And so it really, you know, I think we would have to limit it at some point, but we do welcome any members of council or anyone else hearing about this that would be interested to join, because it isn't, I wouldn't consider it mandatory. These are just the groups that we've identified as being a good place to start because they're already working on implementing the strategic plan goals. And really that's all of our jobs, but these teams in particular have that charge, as well as, you know, more public facing communications, our Office of Neighborhoods, et cetera. So the capacity issue really isn't an issue.
Great. Well, when you set up the next cohort, if you're communicating with me, and I can be sure to communicate with council, and we'll see who's interested and what the capacity is, that would be great. Thank you. Ms. Cheryl?
Excuse me. Yeah, thanks. I think that my question's kind of similar to what Kristen was getting at. And I guess I don't know if the question is for Gwen or someone else, but you know, this seems important that the city council at some point get in on the training, and all of us really. I understand that sometimes smaller groups are better for training situations, so I'm happy to be in line wherever I need to be in line as far as that's concerned. But I do think there would be great value to, when it is appropriate, all of council really doing some level of this, and whether that's through this group or through someone else. Just, I guess, a comment and thought for later.
Great. Well, did anyone want to comment on that, or is that more of a comment? But we're good, Ashley. Claire, I just wanted to note Jennifer Savage somehow is kind of in the meeting, but not quite. I don't know if you can send her a new link, but
I will try.
Thank you. All right, Sandra.
Thank you. So I have a lot of frustrations with this. So ARPA funds, those are the American Rescue Plan funds. So those are because of COVID. And I don't think that this resolution was because of COVID. I think that this was something that was in the works before that. So I think that this is a misuse of taxpayer dollars, because even though that they're federal taxpayer dollars, they're still taxpayer dollars. So I'm really frustrated by that. And, you know, honestly, we have more women on council. We have more women-owned businesses. We're not struggling. I mean, like, I don't know. I thought that we were all equal now. I thought that race and gender did not matter anymore. And yet with this study, it means that race and gender do matter. And it's the most important part about your identity. And I don't think that's true. I thought that your integrity, your worth, your value was the most important part about your identity. And I disagree with this wholeheartedly, but I know it's going to pass anyways, but I'm going to vote no. But because it's going to pass anyways, depending on the time commitment, I would like to be involved in the study because I want to be a part of it. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks. And we can have staff get the information regarding the designation of how ARPA money, there's so many different categories of ARPA money, but we can get that language so that that can be clarified for you. Thanks, Sandy. Meredith?
Can I say something really quick about
sure.
just in relation to that?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate your comment. One of the initial trainings that we went through actually with Consilience was directly related to low income folks. And we know that Missoula and Montana have higher poverty rates than the nation has. And the workshop was called The Social Determinants of Empathy. So it really didn't have to do with race or gender in any way, but it did have to do with low income folks trying to access services within the community and some of the barriers that they might experience to accessing some of those services. So whether it's taking public transportation or not having a way to get to an appointment, not having a phone to answer to accept an appointment, and really just looking through some of the services that we provide through the lens of the resident, the user, the customer, really in that case. And it was really eye-opening for not only, I think, how we can be better, but maybe some things that we haven't even thought of that we can improve, because I think we are a city who is 91% white. So some of the discrepancies or barriers we might not be aware of, but I think low income is something we can all really empathize and relate to. And so that's one of the foundational trainings that we received. And so I just wanted to clarify that as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a huge topic, and I've got a second item on my agenda, so I could speak a lot to this, but in general, to me, this training is how to make a better Missoula on so many different levels. And I think we always look to continue improving. So I'm very supportive of it. But I want to get to our second item, which is also super important. Mr. Carlino.
I believe I was next. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your hand was down.
That's
I'm sorry.
okay.
We'll go back
That's
to Mayor
okay.
Tab. Go ahead.
I'll be brief. I just want to say that as a non-white immigrant to this country, I can tell you we're not where we need to be, Sandra. And in terms of the funding for this, I think there's numerous evidence that COVID has affected communities of color disproportionately. So I think that is something to consider with this. But I just wanted to say thank you to Ashley, Dalton, Aaron, Dale, and the mayor for putting us on this path to achieve the goals that we have on our JEDI resolution that we passed. And also Consilience group was phenomenal at getting us thinking and putting us in the right frame of mind to tackle this really complex issue. And I have no doubt that we will all get engaged at one point or another, and I'm looking forward to that. So I'll be happy to support this motion.
Great, thank you. Daniel?
Thanks. I'm also happy to support this motion for the training. And I think it would be great to I just want to echo like having all council members attend if we can. And I was also curious if like after the training, if the JEDI staff ever comments on like policies and things coming through the council, because sometimes I feel like we might need help like connecting some of the dots of how our policies are affecting justice and equity and diversity and inclusion. So it'd be great if you all can weigh in on policy. I'm not sure if you are allowed to, but that would be really helpful, I think, throughout.
Ashley, do you want to speak to that, or otherwise I can?
Yeah, well, the city JEDI team is one of the strategic implementation work teams, and they had their first meeting yesterday. And so I do believe they're determining their group charter and this type of things that they'll be undertaking. But I think that that's a great thing to bring to that group, and Dalton is a part of that group. And so I guess if Dalton can let folks know that that's something that council requested, then we can definitely see what involvement that group can have, for sure. That's a great idea though. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can add, I think equity is starting to be applied in a lot of analysis with city policy, but I think we want to formalize it in some ways and have a have a lens that we can look through that is applicable each and every time. It takes some work to thoughtfully create it. So I think that is being discussed. So I really do want to get this to a vote, but Ms. Vasika, super quickly, if you can.
I'll make it super quick. I do appreciate Mirta and Ashley's comments. I do have a lot of family members. I have some that are low income that are struggling, and I have I have some immigrant family members, and they agree with me on this motion. And so it's not like I'm sitting here as a white privileged woman saying these thoughts. I struggle with saying these things out loud because it's really controversial, and it's hard for me to speak my mind freely like this. But I have actually done the research with people that I know, my friends, my family, even colleagues, and I still agree with my original comment. So I'm not coming out of this as a place of privilege. So I don't want you guys to think that.
Great, appreciate that. That's why we have a council of 12 to have these discussions. So I appreciate it. Is there any public comment on this item? I'm not seeing any raised hands. So we'll go to a roll call vote. Claire.
All right. Let's start with Mr. Contos.
No.
Ms. Jones,
Yes.
Ms. Cheryl,
Yes.
Ms. Vasika,
No.
Ms. Jordan,
Yes.
Mr. Nugent,
Yes.
Mr. Carlino,
Yes.
Ms. Savage,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Ms. Becerra,
Yes.
and is Heidi West still out? Yes.
I'm here.
Oh, she's here. All right.
Yes.
Yes. All right, that is 9 yeses and 2 nos.
Thank you, Claire. And that can go on to committee reports. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate everyone coming to present on that issue, and we'll discuss it more during our council meeting. The second item on the agenda is Operation Shelter Update. I believe we've got several here to present on this. So this is just a big topic that we've made some progress on this last year, and we've got Emily Armstrong to present on it, and I believe you've got other people also, Emily, so I'll just hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gwen. Morning, Council. Before I get started, there are quite a few folks in the attendees that I would love to promote. They're here as partners for the presentation. So Casey Gannon, David Pritchard, Captain Rosling, Miranda Sanderson, Ricky Henderson, and Sarah Penix can all be promoted if you don't mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I am going to try to squeeze in a lot of information in a short period of time. So apologies in advance for the speed of my speaking. But I will say, because there is so much information, feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I may move us along if I know there's a lot left and we still haven't gotten to it, but I want to allow room for discussion as we're talking so that we don't get to the end and then not have any time for questions. The folks with us today, some of the folks that I just listed from the attendee list, and many of the folks that we see on our screen with us right now are wonderful partners that are all part of this work. Claire Bopp is from the POV. We have Chaz and Miranda Sanderson from Partnership Health Center with the community care team. John Petroff is with the fire department and the mobile support team. Looking at my screen, Jim Hicks is with Hope Rescue Mission. Casey Gannon is with the county. David Pritchard is with Rogers Security. Captain Rosling is with the police department. And then Sarah Penix is also with the POV. I think that is all of our wonderful partner folks. If I missed any of you, I'm sorry. But they may help answer questions or chime in on the presentation. Much of the work that I'm presenting on is work that they're also very involved with and or leading. So want to make sure their voices have space as well. So I'm going to move forward with my presentation. I'm going to share my screen. And like I said, don't hesitate to interrupt with questions as I'm going if you have them.
And Claire, I'm clicking on promote to panelists, but I don't think it's happening. So if are you?
Yes, I'll try a couple of times.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, Emily.
Can you all see that PowerPoint slide? Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Operation Shelter. This is just kind of an overview of the projects that I'm going to be talking about today. So we have the community care team, security, the authorized camping site, emergency winter shelter, the temporary safe outdoor space expansion, and then increased collaboration. And I'm going to start with just a little bit of background. I know we have some new council members since this initiative kicked off last year, so I just wanted to frame it a little bit for some context. So in May of last year, that's when Operation Shelter originated. There was an emergency declared of urban camping by city and county elected leaders. And so that's what prompted all of us staff to kind of dig in and take next steps in initiating a lot of these projects. The Office of Emergency Management with the county did a bunch of research, looked at sites, looked at gaps, and presented all of that research in July of 2021, at which point staff were directed to further explore those options and take next steps on implementation. And then in August 2021 through January of this year, staff were doing just that, exploring those options and taking next steps to create new sites, bolster existing sites, create new partnerships, create new staff positions. Funding was approved from both city and county, all of it ARPA funding, American Rescue Plan Act, and Rogers International was hired as a security firm in October of 2021 to provide safety services around 2 neighborhoods, the authorized campsite and the temporary safe outdoor space. They were already in service at the temporary safe outdoor space at the time, so we just kind of looped that contract in. Winter shelter opened in November of 2021, and then in January 2022, we opened our brand new authorized campsite on the 18th of January, and we continue to work on other authorized campsites, making progress on the ones that we already began, and also continuing towards the TSOS expansion. And then some additional framing just on, we often use this term continuum of options or spectrum of options when we're talking about shelter sites and shelter options across Missoula and what we're trying to build towards. And so this is kind of a graphic of exactly what we mean when we're talking about that, with the caveat that there are so many other programs and projects happening that aren't on this list, but this is kind of the broad overview. So looking at a spectrum all the way from the really low barrier, very basic services, authorized campsite that just meets basic needs and is a place for folks to come so that they're not camping illegally and can have a place to do so legally and safely and with sanitation services, all the way making our way up to permanent supportive housing for those who need that and permanent stable housing for other folks, and trying to meet people where they are along their journey in between each of those steps. So that involves traditional shelter, that involves places like the temporary safe outdoor space that are really high service, really intensive, transitional motel shelter, which is not a project that we're engaged in right now, but was something identified by the Office of Emergency Management when they made their presentation. And then permanent supportive housing, of course, is the goal for everyone that we're working with. So diving into the actual Operation Shelter projects, I guess I'll pause there just for a quick minute to see if anyone has any clarifying questions on the background.
I see Dan has a question.
I just saw on the timeline, it said like for the Rogers International, it went through January 2022, but they're still being hired now. Yeah. Where are we at on that timeline? Because we're past January, and I was just wondering if there was like an update to that part.
Yeah, so the Rogers security contract was executed in October of 2021 and is currently, the current contract goes through October of 2022.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So the community care team is the first project I'll talk about, and we do have some folks from partnerships. So Chaz and Miranda, feel free to chime in if I miss anything critical. But this is a team that we created in coordination with this Operation Shelter initiative. We had some other system-wide positions previously in the Missoula Coordinated Entry System, and we kind of shifted those positions since they weren't serving a function given the nature of our current housing landscape and the housing crisis that we're in, and recreated a new team to meet kind of this mobile need of serving folks where they are at our shelter sites at different locations around the community, with social support, with housing support, and with basic medical support. So this team is comprised of a nurse, a registered nurse practitioner or a registered nurse, sorry. And then I believe they also have a second part-time nurse who helps intermittently, and then 2 tenancy support specialists and a peer support specialist. The team is mostly staffed as of now. We're just looking for a peer support specialist, and partnership is leading all of that hiring and building out of the team. And they visit the authorized campsite regularly. So that's a really, really critical piece of their work. One of the tenancy support specialists is specifically meant to work with the fused population, which you'll see mentioned on the next slide. And so that person goes a little bit more specifically to the locations where their clients are, because they have a specific population, whereas the other tenancy support specialist is broadly supporting the most vulnerable folks in Missoula and in the coordinated entry system. So it's just some basic outcomes, and we have outcomes for each of the projects. I'm not going to go through each one point by point just for the sake of time, but feel free to read through all of those. And this PowerPoint should be available online either now or after the presentation for you to take some more time with. But like I mentioned, we have 1 tenancy support specialist who works with Fuse specifically. So that's frequent users of systems engagement. So these are the folks typically at the in the most vulnerable level of the system. They are highest utilizers of various crisis resources across the system. And so the support specialist working specifically with those individuals has 9 clients already, and just in the month of February had 20 meetings with those clients. So they're already really active in doing a lot of this engagement. And like I said, many of those meetings are in person at the shelter sites where these folks are staying, or at other locations accessible with other programming, and really trying to meet folks where they are in person. Then, as also mentioned, they spend a lot of time at the authorized campsite and really try to be an outreach lead at that site. So we already have had a lot of wound kits distributed there, have spent a lot of time building relationships and working with all of the residents that are living at that site. And that is a lot of that team's work right now, just because this in-person mobile kind of work takes a lot of trust building and relationship building before like connecting with other resources, connecting with other providers can happen. And so that's really where they're investing a lot of their time right now, is really trying to build trust and really trying to build relationships. And you can see anecdotally on the bottom, that's already going a really long way with individuals across the system and at the authorized camping site. So I'm going to move us to our security contract with Rogers International. And I do want to acknowledge, starting off with talking about security here, that I understand there's been a conversation about security, about the Rogers contract in Missoula in the past few weeks. And I just want to acknowledge the concerns, hesitations that folks are having, and say I too had hesitations when we initially created this contract. I'm a social worker by training, and I'm very attuned to marginalization of populations who already are marginalized and already over surveilled. And in building this contract, that was very much a lens that we took in thinking about what can and does security look like with these populations. So I just want to say I hear those concerns. Hopefully we can address them here today, and just acknowledge that that's a conversation that's happening. So security, our contract covers security in 4 different sites: the Cedar Hawthorne neighborhood, the Johnson and North Ave West neighborhood, the authorized camping site, and the temporary safe outdoor space. Like I mentioned, the TSOS had a pre-existing contract with Rogers, and so we just kind of looped that into our existing scope, since it's part of the same Operation Shelter initiative altogether. Security is really intended to keep residents and clients in neighborhoods safe, to really minimize client law enforcement interactions and reduce calls to law enforcement. We know that that is a high trauma interactions with law enforcement, and also more likely to lead towards more interaction with other systems, justice system, criminal justice system. And so we are hoping, and we are now seeing, that interactions with Rogers, having security present instead, is minimizing those calls to law enforcement. It's already decreasing them in the data that we're looking at in the last month or so, and therefore minimizing some of those trauma interactions that have been happening really frequently in the past. There will be a 6-month review upcoming because we started this Rogers contract in October. The 6 months is April. So we're going to take a deep dive into some of the law enforcement data, really look at calls to law enforcement. I don't have hard numbers on that right now. If you're going to ask, I will tell you that's the case. But we will soon, hopefully. We have some numbers, but I don't really want to state them out loud because they're not super firm and we haven't looked at them in depth. And then also hopefully gather some survey data, some anecdotal data, and really look at what the impact of Rogers is and all of the work that they're doing and how we might be able to improve or also just do more of the great things that they're already doing. I see some hands.
Right. I was going to say, if you want to complete your presentation on the security component, and then we would go to questions on the security component. So Emily,
That sounds
you
great.
continue on.
Thanks, Gwen. Okay, so we do have initial evidence that security, specifically in the Johnson and North Ave neighborhood, led to smoother winter shelter operations and fewer neighborhood concerns. We've heard from some of you, council members, we've heard from Poverello staff and neighbors in the area that there just aren't concerns coming from neighbors in the frequency that they were in the last year. Very few folks showing up to neighborhood meetings with concerns or complaints, and similarly few reaching out to council members. And so that indicates to us that there's less complaining and concerns happening. And we also are addressing really quickly the ones that are coming through. So that's not to say there are no issues going on. We recognize there are always challenges, and we just have a stronger capacity to respond to them as they come up with Rogers in the area. Similarly, as I mentioned, we have a little bit of data looking at law enforcement calls from the police department in the month of February compared 2022 to 2021. And the numbers at the Poverello Center and Johnson Street Winter Shelter were both down by a pretty significant amount from 22 versus 2021. I won't say the numbers here because I don't feel confident enough in what they look like, but that is definitely something we saw. Rogers works really closely with Poverello Center staff, the homeless outreach team, the community care team, and other outreach and service providers. And they are signed on as a partner with the coordinated entry system. So they're very involved in the work we're doing. They're not just kind of an outside team that's separate. We are really trying to integrate them in a way that keeps client information safe, but also allows them to understand the workings of the system and really be part of that process. They often are getting to know folks better than I myself am, and many others in the system. And so they become a really valuable source of information and support for the folks that we're working with. They spend a lot of time building relationships and understanding clients, staff, neighbors, and support local businesses as needs arise, concerns arise. They respond to businesses that are within their assigned boundaries. And similarly with neighbors, when they get a call, there's a 24-hour line and they try to respond within an hour or two. And then of course, also work really closely with law enforcement. There is a strong distinction between what is a law enforcement response and what is a security response. And so Rogers and PD are in close contact to try to understand where that line is and be able to work really closely together to coordinate and do handoffs as needed. I think I can take a few questions now. I do want to be mindful there is a lot left of this presentation.
Yeah,
I'm happy to answer.
And I'll put a shout out. We might need to borrow a few minutes from the next committee meeting, but we're going to, first of all, I really appreciated your comment about how security versus law enforcement is actually a far more constructive intervention with the clients than the trauma from a law enforcement interaction, that it's a much better tool. So I appreciate that. But okay, let's go to some quick questions. Kristen. Can't hear you, Kristen. Did we lose you out of
No, you didn't. Sorry, I'm just having a moment.
Okay.
So Emily, thank you so much for this information. I do have a couple questions for you, and it is related to cost effectiveness and training. So it seems like hiring a contract crew is typically more expensive. Is there a reason why we're not actually just building up our law enforcement and having them play this role rather than paying for a contractor to come in?
Yes. So yes, actually hiring our police department and having them do this work is significantly more expensive. We actually just had police department and Captain Rosling, feel free to chime in if you want to, look at these numbers yesterday, and their estimate of police doing the same amount of work is about $2.5 million per year versus this contract, which is $670,000. And it would require a lot of overtime for officers and inability of PD to be able to fill that overtime. They're already having challenges staffing up right now anyway, but the cost alone is significantly higher.
Okay, thank you. And is there going to be a requirement for Rogers International to be CIT trained? We're spending so much money on making sure our police force is trained on dealing with people who are in crisis. And the CIT program's been really wonderful. Can we get Rogers this training?
Yeah, that's a great question. Training was a big piece of our initial contract. We had all of the initial security staff back in the fall go through a good deal of mental health first aid, cultural sensitivity, native cultural populations, LGBTQ+, quite a few different trainings. It was, I think, a whole day or two. So that's definitely something we have our eye on. And I think CIT is a really valuable resource and would very, very much be open to that conversation. David Pritchard is also on the call. He's with Rogers and has indicated that they are always open to new training. So I think that's a conversation we could have for sure.
Thank you. I have another question, please, Madam Chair.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering why we have them patrolling neighborhoods that aren't, I guess I just don't understand why they're patrolling neighborhoods rather than kind of just sticking around the places where the folks are staying. I have definitely heard through the grapevine, again, nothing in data, that, you know, some of the Rogers folks have been tracking people through neighborhoods that are a fair distance away from shelter spaces. And I'm just wondering a little bit more about that. And I would love to see the data when you get it, Emily, of the law enforcement interactions and if these people are being picked up by Rogers and then the police called and what kind of charges these people are getting in that space when you get it. But back to, I'm just curious why they're patrolling neighborhoods, and I'll be done. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll answer that really quickly. And then I will say, I'm looking at the time and there are 10 minutes left and 4 projects left. So I do want to move us forward. They are patrolling neighborhoods because the initial reason for hiring a security firm and pursuing this at all was because we were hearing from neighborhoods, from neighbors around these particular areas, that their neighborhood wasn't feeling unsafe and that there were concerns around the entire neighborhood. And so when we went through these contract processes, we talked with local businesses and had community meetings, talked with neighbors, and heard that neighbors wanted that support to span beyond just specific buildings and really cover the entire area. So most of what they're doing in neighborhoods just kind of driving around and making sure everything is safe. And there have been schools that have reached out to us that are within the boundaries of their staffing and have asked us to have specific staff there at certain times of day for bus stop pickups or those kinds of things. So the short answer is in response to neighborhood request.
Great, thanks. And yeah, we are going to run short of time. I'm going to take 5 minutes from Parks if that's okay with Ms. Cheryl. We might just need to reschedule this for 2 weeks down the road to complete the presentations. I'm sorry, everyone, but this is also important and I want to do it well as we go through. And your last question, Kristen, this program was really built after based on having the emergency winter shelter at Johnson for 1 year and getting all sorts of feedback. So I would recommend that you touch base with Ward 6 counselors and Julie Merritt, the prior Ward 6 counselor. There was a lot of thought that went into this based on prior experiences. So, okay, we might only get through security today, Emily, and we might have to do everything else 2 weeks from now. I'm sorry about that, but Mike Nugent.
Sorry, can I also just add real quick? We will, when we do that 6-month review, we've talked about bringing that information back to council. And at that point, we can have a deep dive into all of the security data and what that presence has looked like. So I just want to make note that there will be likely a time in the next month or two to have this conversation in depth.
All right, great. We'll go to questions and we'll just try and get through these quickly and get another topic covered. Mr. Nugent?
Thank you, Ms. Jones. I think it's important to point out that police work and security work are two very different things. That's a conversation for another day. My question is that there's been some discussion publicly about this security contract and how the implication being that if we weren't spending these funds on security, we could be spending them on more effort to house more people. My question to you is what do our efforts around these spaces like the Johnson shelter and the camping shelter and things like that look like if we don't have a security presence?
Yeah, that's a great question. back to what Gwen was saying about kind of what prompted this partnership with Rogers Security was the challenges that we saw outside the Poverello Center last year, the challenges with urban camping that came about that prompted Operation Shelter in the first place, which are folks camping in places that are not meant for human habitation for long periods of time, blocking public right of ways, disturbing local neighborhoods, and not having safe places, not having hygiene facilities, not being able to access resources in a consistent way. And so I think without Rogers, that's what these projects look like. They have folks in the area that are not getting their needs met, and that are not being supported and are not being addressed. And then they look like an unhappy community with sidewalks and streets blocked and public health concerns in places that are concerning for the neighborhood and the individuals and the programs trying to provide shelter. So Rogers has really become, I mean, I have anecdotal stories about Rogers staff, just doing amazing things for the folks that they're interacting with at these different shelters, providing shelter in their own home, getting extra blankets, bringing folks to, another staff person when they need more help, making connections to the homeless outreach team. They're really trying to integrate and do security in a really unique way, and have gotten to know this population quite well. They know a lot of these people individually. And so without that presence, we kind of lose that additional partner. We lose that extra support around all of these locations.
Appreciate that follow-up, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So it'd be safe to say that spending this money on a security contract is crucial in our efforts to help the houseless population in Missoula.
I would say yes. And if you had asked me a year ago, I might have said no, just based on my own background and my own personal values. But at this point, I would say yes. We have seen significant changes in the past year in the way that we're doing this work. And that's due to a lot of different things, but one of them cannot go unnoticed as security, and the amount of collaboration that they participate in across our system.
Thanks so much, Emily. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Daniel.
Thanks. So I remember that the Poverello Center reached out asking for some security before this became a thing. But they put a letter, the executive director of the POV put a letter on their website, kind of an update on how they think it's going with the Rogers security. So I just wanted to read a quick one-sentence quote from them. They said on the Poverello Center's website, "Like you, we have mixed feelings about this. We want to ensure the safety of our staff, guests, in the neighborhood, but we do not want to make it harder for people to access our services, especially during the cold months." So I'm concerned that the Poverello Center staff has mixed feelings about this. And I guess my question is, one, does Rogers Security International have the authority to use force on our neighbors? And two, does Rogers International Security have any body camera footage, or who's overseeing this? Like, why did we go through the process to get body cameras on all of our police officers, yet we just hire a private for-profit company to then have guns and survey our neighborhoods? So I'm just curious the answer to those two questions.
So to be clear, your questions are they allowed to use of force, and do they have body cams?
Are they allowed to use of force, and do they who's overseeing them? How do we know that they're doing a good job? Like, our police force has a lot of oversight. These people, I'm curious if they have oversight from the city.
Yeah. So I can respond to some of that. I also think that David maybe should respond to some of that, and maybe Captain Rustling, but they do have authority to use of force. This is a conversation we had in depth when we were initiating this contract, was can they carry weapons? Should they be allowed to? Can they bring them into shelters? And it's something we talked about for weeks and weeks and kind of agonized over. They are allowed, with the expectation that a situation that requires use of force is probably outside the scope of what security should be handling. And so they should probably be making a call to law enforcement before it escalates to that level. However, if there is a situation they don't want to have their staff, mostly men, unsafe in that situation, and therefore they felt it was necessary to be armed. And we talked with them in depth. They are not allowed to carry those weapons into the shelters unless they're specifically asked to come in by Poverello Center staff to respond to a crisis. And that's a hard line that the Poverello Center has held, and we very much respect. And Rogers Security has been very open in working with us about that. So that, yeah, it's a conversation we've had. It's definitely a challenging topic. Hopefully they won't have to use use of force, because that should likely be a law enforcement call before it escalates to that level. They have oversight within, they're a company, they have their own oversight processes. I'm not going to pretend to know more about security than someone trained in security and with certifications and all of that. The contract is overseen by the city, but the actual day-to-day operations are overseen by their own staff. They are very frequently in communication with law enforcement, both for specific incidents and also for operations, processes, policies, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of collaboration happening where we're in the same space, myself, Rogers, police, Poverello Center, whoever else it is, to really collaboratively talk through approaches to a lot of these situations. And then I know police and Rogers talk offline a fair amount too as the need comes up. And David wants to speak. Go for it, David.
Go ahead, David, if you can unmute yourself. There we go.
Oh, is that better?
I think you need to turn the sound off on a computer so that you don't have echo.
Okay. So Daniel, with the use of force, the way that goes is for any regular civilian.
Pretty serious echo, and we can't really understand you. Are you able to turn off the volume on your computer? So leave your mic on.
Is this a little better?
Not really. We are, so I'm going to just have to go forward here. We're not going to finish this presentation. Daniel, I appreciate the questions. However, I also really think this is such a big, complicated topic that, first of all, having a sufficient amount of information as to what has unfolded in the past and what the situations were in neighborhoods surrounding the Poverello. And then I think what's going to be crucial is as we exit winter and late spring, as Emily has referenced, we will be doing a full evaluation of how it worked this last year. So I understand the security issue is something that the community has raised a little bit from some people in the community, but frankly, there is a much bigger picture here of how many more people were housed this last winter. And I think there have been so many success stories that I hate for us to get hung up on the narrative of security force when a lot of thought went into it. And what we need to do is, moving forward, figure out how can we make it better for next year? What can we do so that everyone feels safe and comfortable? So I have a bunch of raised hands. We're at 11:15. I'm going to just, Emily, could you just tell us in general what other topics you would have covered today? And then I think we will figure out if we will have you come back to complete in-depth presentations on these other topics, or if it can be part of the 6-month wrap-up. So Emily, I'm going to give you the floor.
Yeah, so this is the list of topics and projects that we were hoping to cover. So after security, we would have discussed the authorized camping site, the emergency winter shelter, the temporary safe outdoor space expansion, and all of the increased collaborative efforts that have taken place over the last year and are now in place that weren't a year ago. The 6-month kind of security evaluation, that presentation was intended to be just security, and I would be hesitant to attach the other 4 to that same presentation, but I will defer to you on how you'd like to proceed.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. And I am, the silver linings that have come out of this pandemic, this is one of them, where we really have addressed this issue of getting more people housed so that they are safer and more comfortable and less health issues and better mental health. Just so many good levels because of the different structures that have been set up out of necessity with this pandemic, and frankly, upon the directive of the federal government saying, here's some money, figure it out. Let's take it to the next level. I'm going to take one more question from Amber Sherrill. We've got a couple of minutes here, and she had her hand raised for quite a while. Amber, did you have comments or question?
I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I appreciate the fact that you're going to keep this over, because clearly I think a lot of people have more questions, and I'm sorry, Emily, we weren't able to see your full presentation because I really want to see these other items as well. But as a representative of Ward 4, which touches the edge of the Johnson Street shelter, the first year I had so many, I wouldn't even call them complaints from constituents, more concerns around safety and public health issues, not just mad that they have to see people kind of walking back and forth. They were real concerns. And I have not had one call in that neighborhood this year. So I feel like this for the community around the Johnson Street shelter, at least, the safety and the public health concerns have been significantly alleviated. I think having some level of security for the clients of the shelter, for the community, for staff, for law enforcement, all of that it's a big topic. So as Gwen said, it is a huge topic and it is a complex one. And I just want to make sure that we have time to really dissect that, because it's easy to point to one thing and think that that's the one solution or something, and that's not true. I also appreciate those impressive numbers at the difference between private security and law enforcement. That is a huge difference financially.
Great. I'm going to take a couple more minutes here and go to counselors who had not yet had a chance to comment or ask a quick question. Jennifer?
Thank you. I will be very brief, but I would just like to put in a word that I do hope we could bring Emily back and finish the rest of this presentation, because I do find it really interesting, and I would love to be able to talk about some of the other things that are on this list as well. And knowing that we're going to have the security conversation, I think is great. I so very much appreciate the work that has gone into this and the work that Emily and her group are doing. And I would love to see if we could get it put back on the agenda for 2 weeks from now. Thank you.
Great. And Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to echo what Ms. Savage said. I would love to see the remainder of this presentation, and thanks to the staff who joined today who weren't able to comment. And then I would like to have a separate dedicated security conversation. And I think it's important to make sure that the stakeholders who went into that conversation are present for that. My husband was the chair of the Poverello Center Board most recently. And so I think that there's a much more nuanced conversation with them than maybe is being portrayed right now. And I also, as Ward 5 does also touch the Johnson Street facility, my experience is very similar to Amber Sherrill's in terms of I heard a lot from constituents about a lot of concerns with just safety concerns in general in the community, and haven't heard any of those this year. I also am the part of town where the temporary safe outdoor shelter was located. It's in county limits, but my ward is the outer bounds of the city over here. Lots of concerns when that was being proposed, and it has been, and none of those concerns came to fruition. And I think there's multiple factors that go into that, security being one of them, resources being another part, having all of the wraparound that these type of facilities provide, which we weren't having before. It was, I think, as Council President Jones said, a much more, people were camping in places where there wasn't facilities, there wasn't support, there wasn't sanitation. And now, obviously we want everyone in Missoula to have a home with walls and a roof if they choose. But that is not the situation. So to try to make as, the best we can and providing these services and wraparound supports and that works for them and the community, we are making strides. We have lots to go still, but I appreciate the concerns around security, but I do want to see the rest of this presentation and have a dedicated security conversation.
Great, thank you. So Emily, I will touch base with you, and I think we're going to have a second session. I appreciate your time. I know there are other people on this meeting too. So we're going to just have to redo this in 2 weeks and do the rest of it. And, you know, it's just really important. So we're going to take the time and do it right. And I appreciate everyone weighing in today and all the other people attending. I've gone 7 minutes over, so we are going to have to stand adjourned. For people who didn't have questions, we're going to get to those next time. All right.
Can I just make a plug for the Engage Missoula website?
Great. Go ahead, Emily.
Lovely, Ginny Miriam. So you can find more information about all these projects on the Engage site, which is engagemissoula.com/safe-shelter. There's more information there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll reschedule and we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.